Commutify presents Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Each week, we explore the challenging issues transportation demand management professionals face on their journey to transition commuters from driving alone to more sustainable, shared, and active commuting habits. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify. This is Between the Lines with Andy Keaton.
Hi, everyone, and welcome aboard to the Between the Line podcast. Today, we're talking with Guru Medasani. Guru is the founder and CEO of Ridy, which is the first e-micromobility company for private communities. We're going to get into that in a second, what that means. This is for offices, campuses, and apartments in the United States. Prior to starting Ridy, Guru spent a decade in technology, working as a data science and big data architect for leading Silicon Valley technology companies like Domino Data Lab and Cloudera, and as a big data researcher at agricultural firm Monsanto, now Bayer. And he resides in Chicago with his wife, Kim, and his son, Milo. And we were talking beforehand. Sounds like you are planning potentially a trip down to Florida to go to Disney World with your young son. Are you excited about that?
Yes, yeah, we're going actually second week of September and super excited. This is actually my first time going to be going to Florida and Disney together.
Nice.
So
Cool.
yeah,
That'll be
super
fun. Yeah,
excited.
I was just there for the ACT conference, so it's I got my name tag hanging here from the ACT conference. It's a good place. Well, thanks for being on today, Guru. We're going to talk today about why micromobility for private communities will help save the planet. So this is an interesting conversation because it's first we're going to talk about micromobility, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about why it's important to have these dedicated systems. So let's start high level. One of the cool benefits that we've been talking about in the past, or many conversations before this, is micromobility can help replace a large number of these short trips between the home and the office. Do you have numbers off the top of your head? Like what percentage of car trips are within 3 miles, within 1 mile? What are we thinking about here? What's the numbers?
Yeah, first, Andy, thanks for having me here. It's a really pleasure to be here. Before I dive into those numbers, one of the really cool statistic that I would like to share, and when I actually mention this to a lot of people, they know it, but they don't realize it, right? Which is 90% of the time we actually spend most of our time during, the work week is between office and house, right? And we look at the statistics and we saw that there is 50% of all the car trips that are actually happening in the United States are between 0 to 3 miles, and of
Wow.
which about 20% of all these car trips are less than 1 mile. So when we look at these two statistics together, what we realize is that majority of these short trips are actually starting and ending at one of these two places, right? Either it's office or at home, and that's a significant portion of these trips, which can actually be replaced by more convenient and simple, transportation options like e-bikes and e-scooters. And actually, if you look at the countries like UK and Germany, where there's more density, in UK, for example, you can replace, close to 70% of
Wow.
the short distance, 0 to 3 mile car trips with the more e-bike or e-scooter. And in Germany, that'll be around 60% of these trips are actually, car trips are less than 0 to 3 miles.
I think we probably intuitively might know that it's like there's a lot of our car trips are short, but that's a huge percentage. Like that blows me away. So
Yeah.
so you already brought it up. So the solution here we're going to talk about today for these 0 to 3 miles, 0 to 1 mile commutes and trips between the office and the home. The solution here is micromobility and maybe specifically e-micromobility, e-bikes, e-scooters. Can you tell me why are these solutions well suited to replace these trips?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, as I mentioned earlier, about 50% of all the car trips are less in the United States are less than 0 to 3 miles, right? When we look at that statistic and say, okay, why are actually people taking these car trips for such short distances? then it often comes down from our own experience in talking to relatives and friends. It's really about comfort, right? So the way you get inside the car, you're fully ready, you're ready to go to work, right? And you can come out on the other side looking the same way, right?
Yeah,
You are fresh and you're
that's
not
true.
tired, right? You're not tired, you're not physically exhausted, and it's the comfort, right? And to gain this comfort, people are actually willing to sacrifice on other things, which is they're willing to spend more time in the car, right? And they're willing to spend more money if they're using Uber or Lyft, right? And they're also willing to spend more time finding parking for this,
Mm,
for these cars. So really, what it came down to, why cars are popular, is that, and people are not trying. I'm not talking about this, is the comfort. And when cities wanted to introduce public bike share, right, it actually helped a lot of people actually get off the cars and actually use more active transportation. But what we think is using micromobility, right, electric micromobility, like e-bikes and e-scooters, it's really we're bringing that comfort to the active transportation, which actually makes the active transportation more accessible for more people, and which is why we think the adoption and transition from the cars, to active transportation is going to be accelerated through this electric micromobility. And in this case, for example, it's actually sometimes more comfortable, right? You're
hmm
riding an e-bike or an e-scooter because you don't have to sit through traffic, right? And you're being in open air. So it's happier, it's exciting, it's fun, right? And then more importantly, you're not spending as much money on an Uber or Lyft or and wasting time trying to find a parking spot for your personal car. And also you don't have to sit through the traffic. So you're getting all the benefits of an open air transportation, right? And actually, in more cases, beating the comfort of a car
hmm.
and the convenience of the car. So, which I think is going to be the biggest reason why we believe e-micromobility is going to replace a lot of the short distance trips.
This, I wish that e-micromobility, e-bikes were a little bit more popular. I don't know, like 5 years ago, because I remember I used to bike in grad school to all of my classes and all my meetings, and I had this one class or this one meeting that was up this hill, and I biked there, and I was just like drenched in sweat. It was the middle of summer. It was like 100 degrees out. I was just so uncomfortable. I walked in that meeting, I was like sweating. It was awful, and I was like, man. I guess I'm gonna walk everywhere now. Like I wasn't gonna drive it, but I was like,
Yeah,
I guess I'll just leave earlier and I'll walk. But if there was e-bikes, that would have
yeah,
made it so much nicer. But I'm
and you're
like really
absolutely
like
right.
them.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I have a personal example I can share as well. Like, I actually own a traditional pedal bike, right? And then in Chicago, where you have winter and then you have summer, most people just store their bikes in the winter and then use them in the summer, right? And then in the summer you have moderate, summer days, and then you have extreme, summer days. And obviously, we're all humans and we're not always arriving to the office perfectly on time. So, it ended up being that I used this personal bike the days when it's the right kind of weather, right?
Yep.
And then when I have this extra time, but I don't have to race on my pedal bike, because then I know I can arrive at my office without sweating. Because I'm really not the kind of guy that, in which I think most people are. I'm not going to shower at an office and change.
Right.
When I'm leaving office, I'm ready to go, and when I arrive, I want to work. That's kind of how I like to see my commute. And it turns out there are a lot of people like that, right? And you have everybody owns a bike, but they use it on a very short amount of days in a given year. And when you look at the reasons here, it's really because that they want to use a bike, but they don't really want all the other inconveniences. Like as you said,
hmm
there's hilly, and they don't really want to sweat, and some days they don't have time, and they really don't want to ride faster, right? Whereas e-bike kind of really makes it easy for them, where they can go faster, and even if it's a really hot day, they're getting this going a little faster, getting a nice breeze without doing any additional work. And interestingly, it actually is healthier over time, because since you are using e-bikes more often, means you will actually go longer distances over time. So there's several studies that have come out and said that how over time it actually equates in the increase in heart rate, right?
Yeah,
Heartbeat rate, so that yeah, it's considered more active as well on e-bikes.
that's great. I think that's great. And we, in a previous episode, maybe it was episode 3 or 4, we talked with with someone from Van Moof Bikes, which is a great e-bike company, and they had some of the same conversations. But I think what's interesting about this conversation is taking it to that next step. And let's just jump into it right now. What you all do at Ridy is, what you call micromobility for private communities, um, where like there's this dedicated on-site system of some kind. Can you tell us a bit more? Like what is this? What is this whole solution that you are kind of spearheading forward?
Yeah, so the insight we're starting this from is the how we spend most of our time in either a workplace or where we live, right? So starting with that insight and realizing that this is where most of the trips are starting. And though public bike share systems and public scooter systems are definitely filling a gap, we felt that there is a strong need for a dedicated transportation system to actually be available where people are spending most of their time, right? Now, in terms of how a dedicated on-site micromobility, like e-micromobility works, is that a corporate campus, decides that, hey, I want to provide a electric micromobility solution for my employees for their short distance transportation needs, right? So what we will do is actually provide a full turnkey solution. So it could be depending on the landscape where the office is and depending on the size of the company. It could be, we're talking about like, number of bikes, number of e-bikes, number of e-scooters, and then you want charging stations. And we also provide the technology for the employees to ride these vehicles, right? These are iOS and the Android apps. So you're kind of getting very similar experience like a Bird or a Lime, but that's a very customized experience for your employees. And it's dedicated in the sense that the only employees can access them. And also they have to bring those vehicles back to be able to end the trip, right? So you can't just go to a coffee shop and then just leave and then go home, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these all have to come back. And then more importantly, we also take care of the maintenance and the operations and everything, right? So we're kind of providing this very, turnkey, customized, easy solutions, plug and play for employers to implement on their campuses. Right. In addition to that, we do also what we call is tailored solutions, where let's say you have a corporate campus that has multiple buildings in the region, right? And you have
Mm-hmm.
employees going between these campuses. What we can actually do is we can actually create this network of micromobility hubs, right? With the charging stations. In some cases, some say, they may not want to install charging stations in every single building, but they may decide in some stations just parking, and some buildings it could be charging. And then we can create this network where people can go between all these buildings. It kind of is augmenting their existing shuttle systems. With shuttle systems, they may have to wait for a shuttle. It's a very fixed schedule. And oftentimes what we have realized is that when people have a meeting, they don't really want to wait. What they will do is they'll jump on a car, right? They'll just like, I don't really want to wait for the shuttle because I have to plan for it. I'm just going to jump in my car and go to this other building that may be like a mile away or, 3/4 of a mile away. So that's where we're really thinking that having this network of mobility hubs dedicated for those, for that campus and for the employer, they can augment their shuttle system with these micromobility devices. In the other scenarios, it's kind of a unique thing that we have realized talking to customers is that you can take New York, for example, in Manhattan or even in Chicago. There are some real estate developers that provide office spaces for big employers, but they can't have all the buildings right next to the transit stations. So they may have one or two buildings that are next to the transit station, but then there are some of the buildings, like say 80% of their buildings are actually away from the transit, like, maybe a mile to 3 miles away from the transit
Mm-hmm.
station. And they provide shuttle systems to kind of connect the different buildings. And it's a very complex process. And it's really hard to even change the schedule because employees will complain that, hey, I have my daughter's soccer practice. You can't change this like schedule, right? And so what we're trying to bring in here is that providing a micromobility kind of network between all these different office buildings for the same owner or the same company, and kind of creating the network where they bring in the flexibility. People can go between different buildings and connect to transit stations, but not having the station a charging station right at the transit station, but the nearest building to the transit station, right? So these are some of the unique things that we have learned talking to customers, that there is a need for it and no one was actually providing it. And that's kind of what Ridy is doing.
There's a lot there. I have some follow-up questions, but I really like that idea, that concept of kind of replacing these short shuttle routes.
Yeah.
Similar to like the short, commutes from the home to the office. It's a little more flexible. It sounds nicer. I really like that, and it really, like, it comes back to this, this kind of idea of transportation demand management, or TDM, where like
Yeah.
we can replace car trips, and we can replace these, like, just kind of, I don't know, more polluting trips with these solutions. And based on what you've said, better health impacts, better time impacts, makes you happier. Like, there's benefits to this, and presumably, I'm going to guess the positive ROI on this over some other solutions that you could implement, like for on a financial side. So I love TDM. There's these solutions, like, always end up coming out the best on everything. It's just like, just do this, don't drive.
Yeah,
But
thank you.
I do have a couple questions. So you talked about having on-site charging, or having these, like, charging networks where you have to return the vehicle to, a location. You have to charge it there. What is the benefit of doing it this way, where there's really this, like, hub here, and maybe comparing it to, I think a lot of people might be familiar with public systems, Bird and the like, Lime and Bird, primarily big two players there.
Yeah.
What is the benefit of doing it this way versus that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, since Bird kind of launched in Santa Monica, there is this impression that, you can go anywhere and then you can find scooters everywhere, right? It is true if you happen to be only living and working in the most dense cities, right, in the world, and it happens to have a Bird or Lime permit, right? But it's actually not true in most of the places, right? I mean, in Bay Area, even in Chicago, there are a ton of campuses that are not in the city itself, but they're actually outside, and they don't have any scooter share systems, because these public scooter share systems are kind of geared towards that, having more density so that you always happen to stumble upon one when you need it. And that's kind of how its system is set up. And even the rebalancing, that's how they do it. They'll go and drop them at the most popular tourist destination spots, or they know that everybody's going to get off this train station at this 8 a.m. or between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. They drop them up there. So rebalancing is really a big issue there. And it makes it really hard to have all these vehicles available when people need them, right? Even if you have an office building, number one, so if you're an office building outside of the areas where these systems serve, you don't actually have access to them at all, right? And then number two, even in the areas where these systems are available, like public systems like Bird and Lime available, right? You're an employee and you are, in the third floor, and you're coming down and you're like, okay, I want to go to a meeting, right? And I have to meet someone that is a mile away, right? And the meeting starts in about 15, 20 minutes, right? You come out of the door and you're like, wait, how do I get there, right? So I don't see any scooters right when I need them, right? And then now you have to decide, oh, should I open a Bird app, or should I open a Lime app? And then you see there is a scooter, and you see one scooter that may be like 3 blocks away. And by the time you get there, someone takes it. Or by the time you go there, you realize that doesn't have much battery, or it's not really working. So what we're trying to bring is that reliability, right? So even though it's there, it's not always there when you want them. And then the other important thing to consider in the office setting is most of the people, when they want to go to meetings or lunch or coffee, right, they want to go in a group setting. So maybe 2 of the employees or 3 of the employees say, hey, let's go grab a lunch somewhere. Let's go meeting somewhere. Let's have a coffee meeting somewhere, right? And the boss can be saying for team employees, like, hey, why don't we all go to lunch today, right?
Yeah.
So in all these different settings, you'll not always be able to provide exactly the vehicles you want when you need them, right? And so what we kind of want to bring in is that reliability and always availability component, right? Having a dedicated on-site set of vehicles, then you know that it's exactly at the spot in my office, right? I can go anytime, right? And actually use this set of vehicles. And today, the reason a lot of people actually use Uber and Lyft, right, and their own personal cars is for exactly the same reason. It's the reliability, right? When you press the Uber Lyft button, it is coming to your door. It may take sometimes longer, it will cost you more, but it's actually coming to your door. And that the car you parked in your garage, right? You can take the spot, you can take it out somewhere and bring it back. You will have the same spot and you have your car available for you. It's that reliability component and always availability component, right? Is a big missing piece with the public bike share and scooter share system. And that's exactly what we're trying to solve by actually providing that as a dedicated system for a group of employees or an apartment setting a group of residents, right? And this we believe will actually help them rely on micromobility a lot more and transition them away from car trips. And that's the biggest difference between the public and I think they all need to coexist, right? But we think that public bike share system and scooter share systems won't necessarily solve all the problems. And if we need to accelerate the transition from car trips, then we need to have additional systems like us that also solve these gaps in these needs.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, everything we talk about all needs to exist. There's not one solution that's going to solve it all. But I like this because it kind of is like, it's kind of like I own an e-micromobility solution without having to actually pay the money to own it and, have the whatever parking I need to secure parking to park it on my own. Because I can have it whenever I want. I really like that idea. I think that has a really good spot, and we've all I think experienced, at least if those of us who have been able to go to these cities where there are a ton of scooters and things going around, where you're like, oh, there's a scooter down there. Oh, no, it's taken. Or like we have two people, we need to somehow find two scooters within a small period of time. And it can be a mess. And particularly like if you're trying to get to a meeting, you can't wait for that. So I think that makes sense. So one other thing that comes with that, though, coming kind of going to the environmental impact here, is you mentioned the rebalancing, the moving of these e-micromobility solutions or these vehicles. What is the impact? Like, presumably people don't have to move these around. Like that seems to have a good systematic positive impact, I would guess.
Yeah, 100%. So it's interesting when we, obviously we saw some of the inefficiencies in the public scooter share system, which is exactly that rebalancing and the charging component, right? And especially the charging component, because these scooters and e-bikes had a very, they have about 20, 30-mile range. And then, obviously when they're sitting idle, they're also depleting, some X amount of range over time, right? So when we first started the company and providing the solutions for apartments and office buildings, we were kind of like, oh, how are we going to charge these vehicles, right? And we have a little bit of less of a problem, but it's some way the same problem. At least we know that all the vehicles are in one location, right? And that's where they're going to be all the time. So we just need to send someone there and swap the batteries out, right? That was a good solution, but it actually costs more for us to go and figure out exactly which vehicles to be replaced, and we need to make more trips. And we started talking to customers and they were like, hey, why can't you have a charging station? And this is back in early 2019. And when we looked around the market and we saw there were actually no charging solutions that we could actually use, we ended up building our own. And we started providing charging stations along with the fleet to these campuses and apartments. And but now, of course, the charging station industry is kind of blooming, and we have excellent partners like Peter, whom you had on your podcast maybe a week or two ago, and we also partnered with other companies like Duct. And so, in addition to our own charging station, we've partnered with different charging station companies to provide solutions to corporate campuses, so they don't have to really worry about who should I talk to? Like, come to, if you work with us, then we'll essentially provide a full turnkey in different kinds of vehicles. But more importantly, the biggest benefit is, twofold, right? One is the convenience and reliability for the rider, let's say that's an employee in an office campus. And the two is the cost, right? So in the convenience, as you mentioned, if you were using public system and you see there is a scooter, but then that had 20% battery, another one has 30% battery, another one has 50%, right? But the 50% might be maybe a block away, right? And then the 20% might be closer. And you have to do all this mental math, right? How far am I going, right? And is this closer? Is this faster to get? So what this actually does, having a charging station with the fleet of vehicles, is it eliminates all of that. When you go for a ride and someone brings it back to the charging station, it's there in the same spot, right? And it's actually being charged. So you don't have to have this range anxiety and also have to make any mental calculations on how far you're going and things like that. So that's a big component. And then the second component is the cost, not having to use labor and to send people out to collect these batteries and then charge them and then put them back, right? Actually, it's a lot of cost. Whereas it's one-time cost to set up a charging station, and the amount of electricity that is required for these vehicles is very, very minimal, right? It's like charging a laptop and a phone essentially, right? And 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 that's a ton of cost savings that we observe in the operations side, which we can then pass on to our customers, which is office buildings. So now we know, okay, we don't have to spend $800 a month or $700 a month on battery swapping for you guys. So that means you don't have to pay that extra amount for us to maintain this fleet for you, right? So that's a big thing. And the third component is also, which often not talked about, is the environmental component, which is, most of these trips that are done to do battery swapping and collecting vehicles is in gasoline powered vehicles like trucks. Right. You can't use a Honda or a Toyota Prius. These are like pickup trucks, right? I'm super excited that Ford F-150 is coming electric, but it's not here yet, right? So most of these are done on gasoline powered pickup trucks or vans, and that that kind of beats the purpose a little bit. And so if we can avoid that part and rebalancing and having these vehicles actually stationed at a place and being charged all the time, we're also eliminating a ton of CO2 emissions, in addition to the CO2 emissions reduced by the vehicles for the short trips. So overall, it has a huge system-wide benefits.
Yeah, and I like this. It's like, every TDM solution, the first thing that comes out, the first technology is like, yeah, this is really great. But then you look at the system, and you're like, well, I don't know, Uber and Lyft is great, but they're driving a lot of, these dead miles on the front end. Yeah. And the same thing when you think about these types of kind of traditional micromobility solutions. So that's where these new companies like Ridy come in and say, wait, we've rethought this whole system. So I really like this idea. Environmental benefits, cost benefits, and you can't beat that.
Yeah.
So we're kind of towards the end of our time here. So like we always do, if there's one thing, two things that our listeners and our viewers should take away from this conversation, in a couple of sentences, why will micromobility for private communities, as we've been talking about here, help save the planet?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've always been passionate about climate change, and and I hear the word planet, and I really want to talk about how we can save the planet. So, in terms of a shared electric transportation, like electric bikes and electric scooters for private communities like offices and corporate campuses, it can help save the planet by providing an alternative transportation option for employees anytime that they want, right? And shifting them away from car trips, essentially, and reducing, the amount of CO2 emissions and, and also traffic congestion, parking congestion will help make the communities happier and healthier, and more importantly, help address the global rising temperatures and climate change. And this is how we believe it's going to help address and save the planet.
And do it all while saving money as well. That's the best part about it. I love it.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, Guru, it's been great talking with you. I think I'm excited to see where Ridy goes and where this industry as a whole goes. I think this is the future of those short trips. So to our listeners, to our viewers, thanks for tuning in again this week. Keep tuning in, because every week we have a new conversation. I love these conversations with people, learning about the future of TDM and what's going on in the space. Make sure you subscribe and give us a like on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you haven't already, take the time to watch our videos on YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. It's fun to see the faces of who's actually talking. And you can see as I move more into my new apartment here in Montreal, you can see as I decorate a little bit more and more each episode. And finally, if you haven't yet, subscribe to our email list. We send out some more information about our guests and about their solutions. So you can get to learn a little bit more about that and just keep up to date with what our podcast is doing. So we're at the end of our time. As everyone knows now who's been listening, we have one final kind of fun question at the end here. We're building this Spotify commuter music playlist. Just in case, you aren't quite to the office. Not everyone has their 3-mile commute that they can take on the e-bikes and the e-scooters. So some people are still driving. Guru, what song would you like to add to our playlist and why?
Yeah, so it's interesting because you mentioned not everybody has a 1 to 3 mile commute. I actually have a 1 to 3 mile commute, and I'm not supposed to listen to music when I'm riding my bike. But when I do get in my car or Uber or something, I'm driving on a long road trip. One of the songs I actually often listen to is "Old Town Road" by Lil Nas and Lil Nas, and it's really interesting because I never thought that the country and hip hop and could go together. And I don't know, it's got a nice ring to it. When I'm riding, I feel like really cool riding, driving and humming to that tune. So yeah, that's a good song. I think everybody should have in their playlist.
Yeah, no, I mean it has to be added. I'm surprised, honestly, it's taken this long for someone to suggest it. Awesome. Well, Guru, thanks for being on. Thanks for the conversation. I'm really excited to see where this goes and keep talking. So yeah, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Andy, for having me. It's always a pleasure talking to you about transportation solutions and what's happening. And I'm a big fan of your podcast. And thanks for having me here.
Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify.